March 23, 1943, 28,000 feet above the North Sea. Hauptmann Klaus Reinhardt adjusted his oxygen mask and squinted into the crystalline blue sky, scanning for the expected formation of American B-17s. His Messerschmitt Bf-109 climbed steadily, the Daimler-Benz engine singing its familiar high-pitched whine. After 3 years of combat over Poland, France, Britain, and Russia, Reinhardt considered himself immune to surprises. The veteran ace of Jagdgeschwader 26 had shot down 43 Allied aircraft. He had faced Spitfires that could turn inside a telephone box, Hurricanes that absorbed punishment like prizefighters, and Soviet Yaks that seemed held together by willpower and wire. Nothing in the sky frightened him anymore. Then he saw it. A shadow flickered across his canopy, impossibly fast. Reinhardt's head snapped right, then left. Nothing. His wingman's frantic voice crackled through the radio. "Herr Hauptmann, behind us! What is that?" Reinhardt craned his neck, looking back over his shoulder. What he saw defied everything he knew about aircraft design. A twin-engine fighter, painted in dark green and gray camouflage, was diving on his formation from above. But that was impossible. Twin-engine fighters were heavy, sluggish beasts used for night fighting or ground attack. They didn't dive from altitude like hawks. They didn't move with the fluid grace of a single-engine fighter. The strange aircraft rolled inverted and pulled through, positioning itself perfectly on Unteroffizier Weber's tail. Reinhardt shouted a warning, but it came too late. 4 streams of tracer fire reached out from the nose of the British fighter, stitching a pattern across Weber's fuselage. The Messerschmitt exploded in a ball of orange flame, pieces tumbling toward the gray sea below. The British fighter pulled up sharply, its twin tails catching the sunlight. It climbed away at a rate that matched Reinhardt's best single-engine fighters, then simply vanished into the cloud layer above. The entire engagement had lasted perhaps 5 seconds. Reinhardt keyed his radio, his voice tight. "All aircraft, return to base. Report unusual British fighter. Twin engine. Fast as a 109. Climbs like nothing I've ever seen." Back at his base near Abbeville, Reinhardt filed his combat report with shaking hands. The intelligence officer, a Luftwaffe Oberleutnant who had never left his desk, raised an eyebrow. "A twin-engine fighter that performs like a single-engine aircraft. Hauptmann, are you certain you weren't facing multiple opponents?" Reinhardt slammed his fist on the desk. "I know what I saw. It was one aircraft, 2 engines, twin tail booms, and it was faster than anything we have." The intelligence officer made a note in his ledger and filed the report. 2 weeks later, Reinhardt received a brief from headquarters. The British had deployed a new aircraft called the Mosquito. The file contained a single, blurry reconnaissance photograph and a warning that was both vague and unsettling. "Exercise extreme caution. Aircraft capabilities exceed standard parameters." What Klaus Reinhardt had encountered, what would soon haunt German pilots across every front of the war, was perhaps the most revolutionary combat aircraft of World War II. Built almost entirely from wood at a time when metal was king, dismissed by skeptics as Freeman's folly, the de Havilland Mosquito would prove to be the fastest, most versatile, and most feared aircraft the Royal Air Force ever fielded. German pilots would come to call it Der Holzhammer, the wooden hammer. But more often, they simply called it uncatchable. November 1940, London. Geoffrey de Havilland sat in his office at Hatfield, north of London, studying a design that most aviation experts had already dismissed as lunacy. The Air Ministry wanted bombers that could carry heavy bomb loads deep into Germany. They wanted armor plate, defensive gun turrets, and large crews. What de Havilland proposed was the exact opposite. He wanted to build a bomber with no defensive armament at all. No guns, no turrets, no gunners. Just 2 pilots, 2 engines, and speed. Enough speed that German fighters simply couldn't catch it. and he wanted to build the entire aircraft from wood. The concept violated every principle of modern bomber design. Since the beginning of the war, the doctrine had been simple. Bombers needed guns to defend themselves. They needed armor to protect their crews. They needed to fly in tight formations so their combined firepower could drive off attacking fighters. The Americans were already building the B-17 Flying Fortress, bristling with 13 heavy machine guns. The British were developing the Avro Lancaster, with 8 defensive positions. De Havilland's proposal seemed insane. Build a bomber from a material that burned, with no way to defend itself, and simply outrun the enemy. The Air Ministry rejected it immediately. But Geoffrey de Havilland was not a man who accepted rejection easily. At 61, he had been designing aircraft since 1909. He had seen the Royal Flying Corps' first hesitant flights and watched aviation transform warfare in the Great War. He knew wood. His company had built the Tiger Moth, the trainer that taught thousands of RAF pilots to fly. Wood was light, strong, and Britain had forests full of it. More importantly, building aircraft from wood wouldn't compete with the aluminum needed for Spitfires and Hurricanes. In late 1940, with Britain standing alone against Nazi Germany, de Havilland went around the Air Ministry. He took his proposal directly to Air Chief Marshal Sir Wilfrid Freeman, who saw something the others had missed. If the concept worked, if speed really could replace defensive armament, then Britain could build a bomber that required no gunners, no heavy turrets, and no armor plate. It would be cheaper, faster to build, and require a smaller crew. Freeman approved a contract for 50 aircraft on November 1st, 1940. The skeptics immediately nicknamed it Freeman's Folly. The design that emerged from de Havilland's drawing boards was unlike anything flying. The fuselage was built like a furniture maker's cabinet, with 2 wooden shells bonded together around a balsa core. The wings used the same sandwich construction. The entire structure was glued together with a special adhesive called aerolite. No rivets, no metal fatigue points, just wood and glue, formed into a shape that seemed to defy aerodynamics. 2 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, the same engines that powered Spitfires and Hurricanes, hung from the wings. Each produced 1,150 horsepower. For a single-engine fighter, that was impressive. For a twin-engine aircraft that weighed less than most single-engine bombers, it was revolutionary. The first prototype, painted yellow for visibility, took off from Hatfield on November 25, 1940. Test pilot Geoffrey de Havilland Jr., the designer's son, pushed the aircraft through its paces. What he discovered shocked even the design team. The Mosquito was faster than the Spitfire Menkava, the RAF's frontline fighter. It could reach 380 miles per hour in level flight. It could climb to 15,000 feet in 7 minutes. And it could carry a 4,000-pound bomb load to Berlin and back. Most importantly, it handled like a fighter, despite having 2 engines. De Havilland Jr. threw the prototype through loops, rolls, and violent evasive maneuvers that would have torn apart most bombers. The wooden structure flexed and absorbed the stress, then returned to its original shape. After landing, he told his father, "It's not a bomber. It's a racing aircraft that happens to carry bombs." The Air Ministry remained skeptical. In early 1941, they ordered comparative trials against the Spitfire. The results stunned everyone. At altitude, the Mosquito was faster than the Spitfire. It couldn't turn as tightly, but in a straight line, nothing could catch it. When the Mosquito dove, it accelerated past 400 miles per hour, faster than German fighters could achieve, even in a vertical dive. Production began in earnest. The first operational squadron, number 105 Squadron, received their Mosquitos in November 1941. The crew conversion was interesting because most bomber pilots had never flown anything that performed like a fighter. Flight Lieutenant Harold Bufton described his first flight. "I expected it to fly like our old Blenheims, heavy, ponderous. Instead, It leaped off the runway like a scalded cat. The acceleration was astonishing. We were doing 300 miles per hour before I'd finished retracting the landing gear. The first operational mission came on May 31st, 1942. 4 Mosquitos from 105 Squadron attacked Cologne in broad daylight while a 1,000-bomber raid hit the city that night. The Mosquitos arrived at dawn, bombing Cologne's railway yards from 15,000 feet, while German fighters scrambled helplessly below. All 4 returned safely. The wooden wonder had proven its concept. Speed really could replace defensive armament. September 19th, 1942. Lieutenant Fritz Obladen of Jagdgeschwader 1 sat in his Focke-Wulf FW-190 at dispersal, waiting for the scramble order. His fighter represented the Luftwaffe's best, a radial engine beast that could outperform the Spitfire Mk5 at most altitudes. Obladen had shot down 19 Allied aircraft. He was confident, experienced, and about to receive an education in frustration. The telephone rang. The operations officer grabbed it, listened, then shouted, "Scramble! British bomber over Aachen, Angels 2-0. 20,000 feet. Obladen and his wingman sprinted to their fighters. Within minutes, both Focke-Wulfs were climbing toward the reported altitude, their BMW engines roaring. At 18,000 feet, Obladen spotted the enemy. A single twin-engine aircraft flying straight and level toward Germany, seemingly unconcerned about the 2 German fighters below it. "Engage," Obladen radioed, pushing his throttle to maximum power. The Focke-Wulf climbed aggressively, eating up the altitude difference. But as he closed to within 2 miles, the British bomber simply accelerated. Obladen watched in disbelief as the gap widened. He was at full power, climbing at his maximum rate, and the British aircraft was pulling away effortlessly. For 20 minutes, Obladen chased the Mosquito deeper into Germany. He never got closer than 2 miles. Finally, low on fuel and frustrated beyond words, he turned back toward his base. The British bomber continued east, bombed its target, and escaped without a single German fighter getting within firing range. Obladen's report reached the Luftwaffe High Command and joined dozens of similar reports flooding in from across occupied Europe. German fighter pilots were encountering a British aircraft they simply couldn't catch. The reports described it as a twin-engine bomber that flew faster than German fighters, climbed better than interceptors, and seemed to ignore the laws of aviation physics. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, read the reports and exploded in rage. "This is impossible," he shouted at his staff. "The British have built a wooden bomber that our fighters cannot intercept? You are telling me that this toy, this furniture made of plywood, is superior to our fighters? I will not accept this." But the reports kept coming. Mosquitoes were appearing everywhere. They bombed Berlin in broad daylight. They attacked ships in Norwegian fjords. They dropped precision bombs on Gestapo headquarters in occupied cities. And German fighters couldn't stop them. Major Hajo Hermann, one of the Luftwaffe's most experienced bomber pilots, turned fighter commander, wrote in his diary, "The Mosquito is the most difficult opponent I have ever faced. It appears from nowhere, drops its bombs with precision, and vanishes before we can respond. Our fighters are helpless." The problem was simple mathematics. The Mosquito cruised at 320 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. The Messerschmitt Bf-109 could reach 360 miles per hour at the same altitude, but only at maximum power. Maximum power consumed fuel rapidly. A 109 at full throttle could maintain that speed for perhaps 20 minutes before running dry. The Mosquito cruised at its high speed, using normal power settings. It could maintain 320 miles per hour for hours. Even worse, when German fighters did manage to position themselves for an attack, Mosquito pilots simply pushed their throttles forward. With both Merlin engines at full power, the Mosquito accelerated to 380 miles per hour. At that speed, no German piston-engine fighter could catch it in level flight. The only option was to dive on the Mosquito from above, and even that rarely worked because Mosquito pilots could see German fighters forming up and simply turned away, using their speed advantage to escape before the attack developed. Hauptmann Hans Joachim Jabs, a successful night fighter ace, encountered a Mosquito over Hamburg in October 1942. He managed to position his Junkers Ju-88 night fighter above the British bomber and dove to attack. Jabs closed to within 800 yards before the Mosquito pilot spotted him. He simply pushed his nose down and accelerated, Jabs reported. My Junkers was diving at full power, and he pulled away from me. In a dive, I couldn't catch a climbing aircraft. It was impossible. The Luftwaffe tried everything. They positioned fighters at higher altitudes to give them an energy advantage. The Mosquitoes simply flew higher. German fighters climbed to 30,000 feet and waited. Mosquitoes appeared at 35,000 feet. The Luftwaffe tried massed formations, hoping to box in the British bombers. Mosquitoes flew around the formations, too fast to intercept. In desperation, the Germans began developing specialized high-altitude interceptors. The Focke-Wulf Ta 152 and Junkers Ju 213 were designed specifically to catch Mosquitoes. But development took time, and by the time these aircraft were ready, the Mosquito had evolved into even faster variants. By late 1942, Göring had stopped issuing his usual bombastic orders about destroying the British raiders. When asked about the Mosquito problem, he reportedly said, "I turn green and yellow with envy when I see the Mosquito. The British knocked together a beautiful wooden aircraft that every piano factory over there is building. Our own industry cannot get that kind of performance out of metal aircraft." The admission was devastating. Germany's industrial might, its advanced aeronautical engineering, and its experienced fighter force had been defeated by what was essentially a racing plane made of wood. The psychological impact on German fighter pilots was profound. They were no longer hunters. Against the Mosquito, they were helpless observers, watching the British bombers fly through German airspace with impunity. January 30th, 1943. Oslo, Norway. SS Obergruppenführer Wilhelm Rediess sat in his office at Gestapo headquarters, reviewing deportation orders for Norwegian resistance members. The building, Victoria Terrasse, housed the German security apparatus in Norway. It was the most feared address in Oslo. From this building, orders went out for arrests, torture, and executions. The Norwegian resistance had tried to attack it multiple times, but the building sat in the heart of Oslo, surrounded by German troops and anti-aircraft guns. It was considered impregnable. At exactly 11:45 in the morning, Rediess heard an unfamiliar sound, a high-pitched whine, growing rapidly louder. He stood and walked to his window, looking up. 3 aircraft were diving toward the building, flying so low he could see the pilots' faces. They were wooden-looking aircraft with twin engines and RAF roundels on their wings. Mosquitoes. Before Rediess could move, the lead aircraft released its bombs. 4 500-pound bombs fell away, their fins stabilizing them. The bomber pulled up sharply, clearing the building's roof by perhaps 50 feet. The bombs penetrated the building's facade and exploded inside, their blast channeled upward through the structure's floors. The second and third Mosquitoes followed, each dropping their bombs with precision. In 15 seconds, 9 buildings in the Victoria Terrace complex were devastated. The explosions killed dozens of Gestapo officers and destroyed records of Norwegian resistance members awaiting deportation. Rediess survived only because he had been standing by his window. The blast threw him across the room, breaking his arm and several ribs. What made the attack so devastating wasn't just the destruction. It was the message. The Germans had thought Victoria Terrace was safe, protected by distance and defenses. The Mosquitoes had flown from Scotland, navigated across the North Sea in winter weather, found Oslo, identified their specific target in a city full of buildings, and bombed it with precision that destroyed the target while leaving surrounding structures largely intact. Then they had flown home. The round trip was over 900 miles, all of it over German-controlled territory. The attack on Oslo demonstrated the Mosquito's most revolutionary capability. It wasn't just fast, it was accurate. Traditional heavy bombers dropped their loads from 20,000 feet or higher, hoping that enough bombs would hit near the target to destroy it. The Mosquito could bomb from rooftop height, placing bombs exactly where they needed to be. This capability came from its fighter-like handling. Most bombers were flown by pilots with bomber training. They flew straight and level, made gentle turns, and avoided violent maneuvers that might stress their aircraft. Mosquito pilots were often former fighter pilots. They flew their bombers like fighters, diving, climbing, and maneuvering violently when needed. This made them nearly impossible to hit with anti-aircraft fire, and allowed them to attack targets with precision that seemed impossible for a bomber. Squadron Leader George Perry, commanding officer of No. 105 Squadron, explained the difference. In a Lancaster or Halifax, you're managing a large aircraft with a crew of 7. Your movements are deliberate and planned. In a Mosquito, you're flying instinctively, reacting to threats, positioning for your attack run like a fighter pilot. You can see your target clearly, adjust your approach in real time, and put your bombs exactly where they need to be. The precision capability led to a new type of mission that would make the Mosquito legendary. Pinpoint strikes against targets that were too small, too well defended, or too politically sensitive for conventional heavy bombers. The raids became famous throughout occupied Europe, demonstrating that the RAF could strike anywhere, anytime, with surgical precision. February 18, 1944. Amiens Prison, France. Over 100 resistance fighters sat in cells, awaiting execution scheduled for the next day. The prison walls were 3 feet thick, the guards were alert, and German security was tight. The French resistance had asked the RAF for help, but attacking a prison was nearly impossible. Bombs large enough to breach the walls would kill the prisoners inside. Anything smaller wouldn't penetrate. The solution came from No. 139 Squadron's Mosquitoes. They would attack at ground level, using delayed action bombs to breach the walls at precise points, creating escape routes while minimizing casualties. The timing had to be perfect. Drop too early, and the bombs would fall short. Drop too late, and they would overshoot into the prisoner areas. Group Captain Charles Pickard led the raid, flying his Mosquito at exactly 50 feet above the frozen French countryside. Behind him, 18 more Mosquitoes followed in 3 waves. German anti-aircraft batteries opened fire as the aircraft approached, but the Mosquitoes were too low and too fast. Tracers arced harmlessly overhead. Pickard's bombardier released their bombs at the exact moment required. They struck the prison's outer wall, penetrating before exploding. The wall collapsed, creating a breach. The following waves attacked the guards' barracks and the prison administration building, destroying German resistance. 258 prisoners escaped through the breaches. Pickard's Mosquito was hit by ground fire on the escape route and crashed, killing both crew members. But the mission succeeded beyond all expectations. The Amiens raid became legendary, but it was just one of dozens of similar precision strikes. Mosquitoes attacked the Gestapo headquarters in Copenhagen, timing their bombs to explode during a senior staff meeting. They bombed the Gestapo archives in The Hague, destroying records that would have led to resistance arrests. They struck the Shell House in Copenhagen, destroying Gestapo records while sparing Danish civilians in adjacent buildings. Each raid followed the same pattern: low-level approach, flying so low that German radar couldn't track them. Precise navigation using terrain features, arriving at the target exactly on time. Precise bomb delivery, hitting specific buildings while avoiding nearby structures. And high-speed escape, using the Mosquito's superior performance to evade pursuing fighters. The psychological impact on the Germans was devastating. No target was safe. If the RAF wanted to destroy a building, they would destroy that building and leave everything around it standing. German officers moved their headquarters frequently, never staying in one location long. Gestapo buildings were evacuated at random intervals based on intelligence about potential RAF raids. The constant fear disrupted German operations more effectively than random bombing could have achieved. Major Otto Brauner of the Luftwaffe's Fighter Command analyzed the Mosquito threat in a report dated April 1944. The British Mosquito represents a threat we cannot effectively counter. Its speed prevents interception. Its low-altitude approach defeats radar early warning. Its precision bombing allows attacks on targets we considered safe. We have no effective defense. Our fighter pilots are demoralized. They scramble, knowing they will not catch the enemy. This is a new type of warfare, and we are losing. Wing Commander John Cunningham stood in the operations room at RAF Hunsdon, studying the radar plot. It was March 15, 1943, and German bombers were crossing the coast, heading for London. Cunningham, nicknamed Cat's Eyes Cunningham by the British press, was the RAF's leading night fighter ace with 20 victories. Tonight, he would be flying a new variant of the aircraft he'd come to know well, the Mosquito NF Mosquito II night fighter. The night fighter version of the Mosquito represented another revolutionary concept. Instead of mounting defensive guns, the RAF had mounted offensive guns. 4 20mm cannons and 4 303 machine guns in the nose, all firing forward. Combined with the latest AI Mk 4 radar in the nose, the Mosquito night fighter was a lethal predator. Cunningham and his radar operator, Flight Lieutenant Jimmy Rawnsley, climbed into their Mosquito as the ground crew finished fueling. The aircraft carried no bombs tonight, just ammunition and fuel. They would hunt for 4 hours, ranging across southern England and the Channel, looking for German intruders. At 22,000 feet, Rawnsley picked up a contact on his radar scope. Contact, 11 o'clock, 5 miles, slightly below us. Cunningham turned toward the contact, throttling back to avoid overshooting. The Mosquito's speed advantage, so valuable against German fighters, became a liability when hunting bombers. The British fighter was often faster than the German bombers it hunted, requiring careful throttle management. At 2,000 yards, Rawnsley identified the target. It's a Junkers 88, straight and level. Cunningham positioned the Mosquito slightly below and behind the German bomber, hidden in the blind spot beneath the enemy's tail. He could see the bomber clearly now, silhouetted against the stars. It was flying in a gentle turn, searching for targets in London's blacked-out sprawl. At 200 yards, Cunningham opened fire. The 4 cannons and 4 machine guns created a stream of destruction. Shells and bullets raked the Junkers from tail to nose. The German bomber's wing erupted in flame, and the aircraft rolled inverted, beginning its death spiral toward the ground. Cunningham pulled up, searching for additional targets. The entire engagement had lasted 40 seconds. That night, Cunningham shot down 3 German bombers. Other Mosquito crews claimed 5 more. The German bombing raid, which had planned to hit London with 60 aircraft, was disrupted. Bombers scattered, dropped their loads early, and fled for the coast. Only a dozen bombs fell on London, causing minimal damage. The night fighter Mosquitoes transformed RAF night defense. Before their introduction, German bombers could operate with relative impunity after dark. British night fighters were slow and cumbersome, often unable to catch raiders. The Mosquito changed everything. It was faster than any German bomber, could operate at any altitude the enemy used, and carried devastating firepower. Hauptmann Martin Druce, one of Germany's most successful night fighter pilots with 52 victories, encountered Mosquito night fighters in May 1943 and barely survived. We were hunting British bombers over the Ruhr when my radar operator detected an aircraft approaching from behind. Fast, too fast for a British bomber. I realized it was a British night fighter and immediately dove for the ground. We leveled off at 100 meters, flying at maximum speed through the darkness. The British fighter followed us down, staying right on our tail. Only a cloud bank saved us. We flew through it, changed course, and escaped. But I knew if that pilot had been 30 seconds closer, we would be dead. The Mosquito night fighters began hunting over Germany itself, following German bombers back to their bases. Squadron leader Franz Burbridge developed the tactic of lurking near known Luftwaffe night fighter bases, waiting for German aircraft to return from missions. The German pilots, relaxed after a successful mission and eager to land, never expected to be attacked over their own airfield. Burbridge shot down 21 German aircraft this way, becoming the RAF's most successful night fighter pilot. The tactics were ruthless but effective. German aircraft approaching their bases would flash identification lights to signal the controller. Mosquito pilots watched for these signals, then positioned themselves behind the landing aircraft. As the German pilot lowered his landing gear and flaps, reducing speed for landing, the Mosquito would strike. Most German pilots never knew they were under attack until the cannons opened fire. Oberleutnant Friedrich Karl Müller survived such an attack in June 1943. We had just returned from a mission over Hamburg. The weather was perfect. We could see our runway clearly. I lowered the landing gear and was turning onto final approach when my aircraft shuddered. Cannon shells walked up the fuselage. The wing exploded. I barely escaped before the aircraft hit the ground. We lost 4 crews that night, all shot down within sight of our own base. It was a nightmare. We were being hunted like animals. By late 1943, German aircrew morale was suffering. British bombers could be shot down. German pilots could develop tactics and techniques that worked. But the Mosquito was different. It couldn't be caught. It struck from nowhere. It was faster, more maneuverable, and better armed than anything the Luftwaffe had. Fighter pilots who transferred from day-to-night operations found themselves facing an enemy they couldn't defeat. The night fighter Mosquitoes also began attacking German trains, convoys, and ground targets. The combination of speed, firepower, and the latest navigation equipment made them the perfect intruder aircraft. They could penetrate deep into Germany, attack specific targets, and escape before German defenses could react. Wing Commander Karl Bob Brahm, who would become the RAF's most decorated pilot with 29 aerial victories and numerous ground targets destroyed, specialized in these intruder missions. His technique was simple, but required nerves of steel. We would fly to Germany at low level, below radar coverage, find a major railway line or road, then simply follow it, looking for targets. Trains, convoys, anything moving. When you found something, you hit it with everything. Cannons, machine guns, sometimes bombs. Then you got out as fast as possible. The Germans responded by installing more anti-aircraft guns along major routes and increasing fighter patrols. But the Mosquitoes were too fast and too unpredictable. They struck randomly across Germany, attacking dozens of different locations in a single night. German defenses couldn't be everywhere. General Joseph Kammhuber, commander of Germany's night fighter forces, wrote in a report dated September 1943. The British Mosquito has fundamentally changed the nature of night warfare. We can no longer operate with confidence even over our own territory. Our bombers are being intercepted before reaching their targets. Our fighters are being hunted over their own bases. Our ground movement is being interdicted. This aircraft represents a threat we cannot effectively counter with current resources. Group Captain Donald Bennett had a problem. It was early 1943, and Bomber Command was losing too many aircraft to German defenses. Worse, most of the bombs were missing their targets. Night bombing was inherently inaccurate. Crews navigated by dead reckoning used unreliable navigation aids and often released their bombs miles from the intended target. German cities were being devastated, but the factories and military installations were often untouched. Bennett commanded the Pathfinder Force, an elite unit tasked with marking targets for the main bomber force. The idea was simple. The best crews would arrive first, identify the target precisely, and mark it with colored flares. The following bombers would simply aim for the markers. But the Pathfinders needed an aircraft that could arrive first, navigate precisely, mark the target accurately, and survive German defenses. The Mosquito was perfect. The first Pathfinder Mosquitoes began operations in April 1943. They carried a new device called oboe, a radio navigation system that allowed precision bombing through cloud cover. 2 ground stations in England transmitted radio signals. The Mosquito flew along the arc, where the signals intersected, following a precise path to the target. At the exact moment required, the ground controller transmitted a signal, and the bombs automatically released. The system was accurate to within a few hundred yards, even from 30,000 feet. The German defenses couldn't counter oboe. The Mosquitoes flew too high and too fast for fighters to intercept. Anti-aircraft guns couldn't track them accurately, and the Mosquitoes arrived and departed before German defenses could concentrate. Within minutes of the Mosquito strike, the main bomber force would arrive, guided by the fires and markers the Mosquitoes had placed. Squadron leader Hamish Mahadi described a typical Pathfinder mission. We would take off from England in darkness, climb to 30,000 feet and cross the channel. The German radar would detect us, but by the time they scrambled fighters, we would be over the target. Oboe would guide us to the release point. We'd drop our markers, usually colored flares that burned for several minutes. Then we'd get out, diving away at maximum speed. Behind us, hundreds of bombers would arrive, their crews simply aiming for our markers. It was precision through technology. The oboe Mosquitoes revolutionized Bomber Command's effectiveness. Before their introduction, only about 20% of bombs fell within 5 miles of their intended target. With oboe-equipped Mosquitoes marking targets, accuracy improved dramatically. By mid-1943, over 60% of bombs were falling within 1 mile of the aiming point. The Germans knew about oboe. Their signals intelligence had identified the system and understood how it worked. But they couldn't stop it. The only defense would be to jam the signals, but oboe operated on frequencies that changed regularly. By the time German jamming equipment was tuned to one frequency, the British had moved to another. Oberst Josef Schmid, chief of Luftwaffe intelligence, wrote in frustration, "The British Mosquito-oboe combination represents a technical development we cannot match. They have achieved bombing accuracy at night that exceeds our daylight capabilities. Our cities are being systematically destroyed by a system we understand, but cannot defeat. This is precision strategic bombing, and we have no counter." The Mosquito Pathfinders also served another crucial role. They confused German defenses. When radar operators detected Mosquitoes approaching, they couldn't tell if it was a small nuisance raid or the Pathfinders for a major attack. German fighters and anti-aircraft guns had to prepare for a major raid every time Mosquitoes appeared. This consumed resources and exhausted crews. Often, the Mosquitoes were alone, conducting a harassment raid with no bombers following. German defenses would be fully activated for hours, only to discover they'd been chasing a handful of aircraft. The psychological warfare was deliberate. Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Harris, commander of Bomber Command, understood that the Mosquitoes' speed and versatility made it perfect for keeping the Germans off balance. He ordered frequent small Mosquito raids against German cities, timed to disrupt sleep and force factory workers into shelters. The production loss from these nuisance raids exceeded the damage from the small bomb loads. In Berlin, the Mosquito raids became a nightly occurrence. Fast, high-flying bombers would appear without warning, drop a few bombs, and vanish before defenses could react. The raids rarely caused significant damage, but they forced millions of Berliners into shelters night after night, disrupting sleep and demolishing morale. The Germans called them Mosquito parades, and they became a hated feature of life in the Reich's capital. Goebbels noted in his diary on November 26, 1943, The Mosquito raids are having a terrible effect on morale. The people can handle major raids. They understand we are at war. But these nightly harassments, where we must shelter for an hour or more, often for just a single aircraft, are wearing everyone down. Workers arrive at factories exhausted. Production is suffering, and there is nothing we can do. Our fighters cannot catch them. Our guns cannot hit them. The British fly where they please. Spring 1944. The air war over Germany had reached its crescendo. American bombers raided by day, British bombers by night, and the Luftwaffe was bleeding to death, defending the Reich. But the Americans faced a particularly deadly threat. German rocket-equipped fighters that could destroy B-17s and B-24s from outside the range of the bombers' defensive guns. The Messerschmitt Me-210, armed with 21-centimeter rockets, would approach bomber formations from beyond gun range, launch their rockets in salvos, and retreat before the American gunners could respond. A single rocket hit could destroy a heavy bomber instantly. The Americans were losing dozens of bombers to these attacks. The solution came from RAF Fighter Command. Mosquito fighter bombers would escort American formations, using their speed and firepower to hunt the German rocket fighters. The first mission flew on March 6, 1944. 12 Mosquitoes from No. 23 Squadron joined a formation of B-17s attacking Berlin. Flight Lieutenant Robert Brahm led the Mosquito flight. At 28,000 feet, they orbited above the bomber stream, watching for German fighters. The Luftwaffe attacked in force, over 100 fighters diving on the American formation. Among them were several Me-210s, their distinctive silhouettes marked by the bulky rocket tubes under their wings. Brahm rolled his Mosquito inverted and dove. The acceleration was instantaneous. Within seconds, his airspeed indicator passed 400 miles per hour. Below him, an Me-210 was positioning for a rocket attack. Its pilot focused on the B-17s ahead. Brahm pulled through at the bottom of his dive, positioning himself perfectly behind the German fighter. At 400 yards, he fired a short burst. The 420mm cannons and 4 machine guns created a cone of destruction. The Me-210 disintegrated, pieces tumbling earthward. Brahm pulled up, already searching for his next target. Around him, other Mosquitoes were engaging German fighters with devastating effectiveness. The combination of speed, firepower, and surprise was lethal. The Me-210s, seeing Mosquitoes diving on them, abandoned their attack runs and fled. The rocket fighters were optimized for attacking bombers, not dogfighting with fast, heavily armed interceptors. The American formation continued to Berlin and back with fewer losses than any previous deep penetration raid. The Mosquito escort missions became standard procedure. American bomber crews, initially skeptical of British help, quickly learned to appreciate the wooden wonders. Technical Sergeant Mike Roselli, a waist gunner on a B-17, wrote home, "Today we had British Mosquitoes flying top cover. They're these weird-looking wooden planes with twin engines. But when the German fighters showed up, those Mosquitoes came down like hawks. They shot down 3 Germans before we even got our guns in action. I've never been so happy to see a British roundel in my life." The Mosquitoes' versatility extended beyond escorting bombers. They also served as bomber destroyers, using their speed and firepower to attack German bombers before they could reach England. In early 1944, Germany launched a new weapon, the V-1 flying bomb, essentially an early cruise missile. Thousands were launched at London and other British cities, causing significant casualties. The RAF assigned Mosquito squadrons to hunt the V-1s. The flying bombs were fast, reaching 400 miles per hour in level flight. Most British fighters struggled to catch them. The Mosquito, however, could easily overtake the V-1s, approaching from behind and destroying them with cannon fire. Wing Commander Roland Beaumont specialized in V-1 hunting. He developed a technique of approaching the flying bomb from slightly below and behind, then firing a short burst into the fuselage just behind the pulse jet engine. The V-1 would explode, and Beaumont would fly through the debris cloud, his Mosquito's rugged structure absorbing the shrapnel. Between June and September 1944, Mosquito fighters destroyed over 600 V-1s. The success rate was higher than any other fighter type. The combination of speed, firepower, and structural strength made the Mosquito ideal for the dangerous mission of intercepting flying bombs. But perhaps the Mosquito's most spectacular role came in attacking German infrastructure. By late 1944, Germany's war machine depended on a fragile transportation network. Railways moved troops, supplies, and raw materials across the Reich. The Germans knew the railways were vulnerable, but believed the volume of traffic and the difficulty of precision bombing would protect them. They hadn't counted on the Mosquito. Armed with 57mm anti-tank cannons mounted under the fuselage, the Mosquito M13, nicknamed the Tsetze, could destroy locomotives with a single hit. The armor-piercing shells could penetrate the thick steel boiler plates of German locomotives, causing catastrophic explosions. Flight Lieutenant Tony Phillips flew Tsetse Mosquitos on interdiction missions over occupied Europe. We would fly at low level, following railway lines until we found a train. Then we'd position ourselves behind the locomotive and fire the big gun. The 57mm cannon had an incredible punch. One hit on the boiler, and the entire locomotive would explode in a massive steam eruption. The train would stop, blocking the line for hours or days. It was surgical destruction of Germany's transportation system. By early 1945, Germany's railway system was in chaos. Mosquitoes attacked trains across Germany and occupied territories, destroying hundreds of locomotives monthly. Combined with American daylight precision bombing of marshalling yards and British night bombing of railway facilities, the campaign brought German transportation to near collapse. Troops couldn't move to threatened areas. Supplies couldn't reach the front. Raw materials couldn't reach factories. The German war machine was starving to death. General Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, later testified that the transportation bombing campaign was more effective than the attacks on factories and oil refineries. We could repair damaged factories, he said. We could find alternative oil sources. But when the railways stopped moving, everything stopped. The British Mosquitoes, with their precision attacks on individual trains and stations, were extraordinarily effective. They could destroy key targets that conventional bombers would miss or damage with excessive collateral destruction. April 20th, 1945. Berlin. The Reich was dying. Soviet armies surrounded the capital. American and British forces pushed from the west. The Luftwaffe had ceased to exist as an effective force, but Hitler demanded a special mission for his birthday, a strike against the Western Allies to demonstrate that Germany could still fight. The Luftwaffe assembled its last operational bombers, perhaps 30 aircraft total, scraped together from training units and repair depots. They would attack Allied positions in broad daylight, a suicide mission that everyone understood was meaningless. As these aircraft took off from scattered airfields around Berlin, Mosquitoes from RAF's 2nd Tactical Air Force detected them. Wing Commander John Wooldridge led a flight of 6 Mosquitoes that intercepted the German formation over central Germany. The fight was one-sided. The German bombers, many flown by instructors and students, lacked fighter escort and were hopelessly outmatched. Wooldridge's Mosquitoes swept through the formation, cannons blazing. Within minutes, 14 German bombers were shot down. The survivors fled back to their bases. Hitler's birthday strike never reached Allied lines. It was a fitting end to the Mosquitoes' war. From its first tentative missions in 1942 to the final desperate battles of 1945, the Wooden Wonder had dominated the skies over Europe. German pilots who had fought through the entire war agreed on one thing. Of all the Allied aircraft they faced, the Mosquito was the most feared. Major Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer, the highest-scoring night fighter ace of all time, with 121 victories, was asked after the war Which Allied aircraft gave him the most difficulty? His answer was immediate. The Mosquito. Without question. It was faster than our night fighters, more maneuverable than our interceptors, and carried more firepower than aircraft, twice its size. When you encountered a Mosquito, your options were limited. You could run and hope it didn't chase you. Or you could fight and probably die. There was no tactical solution. The British had built the perfect combat aircraft. The statistics supported his assessment. During the war, the RAF lost 993 Mosquitoes to all causes. German aircraft losses to Mosquitoes exceeded 4,000. The kill ratio was overwhelming. More importantly, the Mosquito achieved a mission success rate that exceeded any other Allied aircraft. Whether bombing, fighting, or reconnaissance, the Mosquito completed its mission and brought its crew home. The production numbers told their own story. Britain built 7,781 Mosquitoes during the war. At peak production, de Havilland factories and subcontractors completed nearly 100 aircraft monthly. The entire aircraft was built from wood, using craftsmen who would otherwise have been building furniture or making musical instruments. Britain had created a world-class combat aircraft without consuming scarce aluminum resources. After the war, captured German documents revealed the true extent of the Mosquito's impact. Luftwaffe intelligence had tracked Mosquito operations meticulously, analyzing every raid, every encounter, and every tactic. The conclusion was unanimous. Germany had no effective counter to the Mosquito. All proposed solutions, faster fighters, improved radar, better tactics, had failed. The Wooden Wonder had proven unstoppable. General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, the Luftwaffe's fighter commander, wrote in his memoirs, "I despised the Mosquito. It made our lives miserable. It could fly higher, faster, and longer than our fighters. It carried a respectable bomb load. It served as a night fighter. It performed reconnaissance. It did everything well, and some things exceptionally. The British had achieved with wood and glue what we could not achieve with our advanced metal designs. It was humiliating." The Mosquito continued serving after the war, flying with air forces around the world until the late 1950s. But its wartime record remained unmatched. 7,781 aircraft, hundreds of thousands of combat sorties, thousands of German aircraft destroyed, countless successful precision strikes, a mission success rate exceeding 90%, and a loss rate lower than any other combat aircraft of the war. Geoffrey de Havilland's vision, dismissed as Freeman's Folly in 1940, had proven to be one of the war's most successful designs. The concept of using speed instead of defensive armament, of building from wood instead of metal, of creating a multi-role aircraft instead of specialized types, had revolutionized air warfare. When Klaus Reinhardt, the German pilot who first encountered a Mosquito in March 1943, was interviewed after the war, he was asked if he ever learned to counter the British aircraft. His laugh was bitter. "Learn to counter it? We never even learned to catch it." From that first encounter until the war's end, the Mosquito remained uncatchable, unstoppable, and unforgiving. When you saw those twin tail booms coming, you knew someone was about to die. Usually, it was us. The Wooden Wonder had earned its reputation. In a war dominated by metal monsters, a furniture-quality aircraft of wood and glue had proven superior to everything Germany could build. The Mosquito hadn't just won battles. It had won the psychological war, transforming German pilots from hunters into hunted. Der Holzhammer had struck, and the Luftwaffe never recovered.